Welcome back to the Matt and Eric Talk Twins podcast. We have a surprisingly pretty busy week behind us, considering the Twins had Monday off. More wins than we do losses. And in terms of wins, I think that sending Matt Wallner down to AAA might count as one of those. We'll get to all of that and more. But first, Matt, give us a heat check. How are you feeling this week?
Man, I'm feeling okay. I mean, the Twins are now 21-26. They're 5 games below 500. It's not where you want to be, but they're at least kind of treading water. And I think the Wallner move is probably the first of many to come, and that could set the Twins up for an exciting second half.
Yeah, at the very least, the Wallner move continues to show to me that the Twins are serious about putting forth their best effort the entire season. I think that, a move like this wasn't necessarily unexpected. The unexpected part is simply that it happened to be Matt Wallner. But we were talking all offseason about how if the Twins want to be serious about making this roster competitive, they're going to be having to make some tough decisions and tough cuts early into the season. So, to their credit, they've been sticking true to their story so far.
Yeah, and I guess we should, just for background for anyone who didn't see the move, the Twins sent down Travis Adams and Matt Wallner, and they called up Ryan Kreidler, and who's the other guy they called up?
Zebby Matthews, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was the corresponding move for Matthews. So I think that's interesting too, and we can get to it in a bit. But the Wallner move, I think, signifies the Twins want to play Austin Martin more regularly, especially because the corresponding move for him was Ryan Kreidler, a guy that we don't expect to be demanding, consistent playing time at all. And so I think it's interesting that the Twins are now willing to play Austin Martin every day and right, regardless of lefty or righty on the mound. I will say, I think that this move probably looks a little bit different if we have literally any of our left-handed hitting outfielders in AAA healthy. Obviously, right now, Manuel Rodriguez, Walker Jenkins, and Alan Roden are all hurt. It'd be a little bit early to call up Jenkins, but I think for sure the other two, if they were available, would be on the roster for the Twins.
Yeah, to me, Roden would have been the no doubt promotion if he were healthy. That's where his injury really gets unfortunate because we wanted to see Roden in the opening day roster and he never made it and then looked great at AAA. So for him to get hurt right before his opportunity finally came up was really frustrating. I do think it's kind of funny how we did bring up Ryan Kreidler in a corresponding move to send down Matt Wallner because, like you said, you would have thought that it wouldn't really have much of an effect on the outfield pecking order. But in the 3 games since he's been called up, Ryan Kreidler has just started in center field every day in place of Byron Buxton, who's been out with, I believe it's hip issues.
Correct.
Yeah. So that is fascinating to me for 2 reasons. For one, and me and Matt talked about this a bit when Kreidler first came up. If James Outman isn't getting starts in center field even over Ryan Kreidler, why is he on the roster? In what world is James Outman here to be anything other than a defensive specialist and pinch runner in the late innings? So if they think that Ryan Kreidler is a better option in center field, I think there's absolutely no excuse and no room for James Outman on this roster.
In Outman's defense, he's been playing well recently, and also him and Kreidler were both in the lineup today against a left-handed pitcher, which was a little bit weird. And I think Kreidler's just been out there in part because they trust his defense in center field more. I think the Twins at this point have soured a bit on Outman's defense in center. They definitely still trust him in a corner, but we've seen them play Kreidler in center over him. I think at some point a couple weeks ago they played Austin Martin in center over him. But yeah, I mean, I agree. He's definitely just there for base running and occasional start against a right-handed pitcher. And I think it's not so much the player that we disagree with the Twins on, it's the use of that 26th man on the roster. Because we had these same concerns last year with Deshaun Kersey. It's like he doesn't hit at all. He doesn't play very often. He's a late inning defensive sub, maybe pinch runner. And the Twins are using James Outman in the exact same role. And I think we're just maybe less keen on using a roster spot for such a seldom used role.
I I actually maybe don't hate the use of the roster spot right now as much as I did when the season started, just because he is still our fifth outfielder. And I think with the guys we have and the desire to really platoon, especially Trevor Larnach still, that we do need to have five very capable outfielders on this roster. But what I do like, it shouldn't come as a surprise to you or anybody listening. I like that the Twins decided to just give Austin Martin the everyday right field job, which I imagine will happen at least until either Manuel Rodriguez or Walker Jenkins comes up. I would sure hope that at the very least, Emmanuel Rodriguez would be ready to come up before Alan Roden. But I do think that once the Twins have any healthy corner outfielder again, that Kreidler's going to be headed back down. But I like that Austin Martin has the everyday right field job for now, because I've been saying that he's done everything he could to show that he's an improved player this season. And the only way to truly find that out now is by giving him everyday at bats.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely hard to argue with Martin's performance so far. I will say I'm not the biggest believer in him continuing to, sustain this success. It is pretty BABIP driven, and it's a lot of walks. We've talked about this at length, and there's just very few hitters who are able to walk to the level that Austin Martin does without doing real damage with their bats. And so I'm a little bit suspicious of his long term output, but definitely in the short term, it's an upgrade over Wallner. And just getting Wallner's glove out of the regular defensive alignment is a big win for the Twins. Matt Wallner currently is dead last in baseball in defensive runs saved in right field. And so replacing him with Austin Martin, who's an average or a little bit above average defender, is a big win, even if Martin's not, the most productive hitter. And even if that bat regresses down the stretch.
So, looking ahead at some of the house cleaning the Twins are going to have to do, if they do want to get Emmanuel Rodriguez up as soon as he's healthy, which is something I think we both suspect they are aiming to do, where does he fit into this entire rotation then of outfielders? Do we think he becomes the everyday right fielder and we put Martin and Larnach back into a left field platoon, and then we honestly, if Buxton is healthy at that point, we probably send down James Outman over Ryan Kreidler if we want a backup center fielder still? Or does Emmanuel Rodriguez become part of a platoon to start the season? Is he kind of our backup center field option behind Buxton? I'm just curious where you see all of this fitting together.
So I think with Jenkins and Erod, if they're coming up, they're playing every day versus righties versus lefties. I don't think either of them should or will be platooned. And so in the short term, I could see the Twins, doing kind of a Larnach Martin platoon in left, just like they started the year. But I also think, if both of those guys are playing very well and we expect them to, get everyday plate appearances, there's a world where the Twins kind of give up on Josh Bell or cut into his playing time or have him play more first and just move Trevor Larnach to a DH role. Larnach's been much improved in the field, and I think that's been a surprise so far. But he's still not a guy that you're going to prioritize for at bats when you have other options. And he seems like a sensible fit to move to a DH role, especially if our DH and first base bats are still not performing.
I think it's really a full circle moment for this podcast that we are now semi advocating for Trevor Larnach to get some regular DH at bats after we spent all offseason saying that he wasn't valuable enough as a strong side platoon hitter to just be a DH, but we also didn't really believe that he could be a left fielder.
I will say I was beating the drum for Trevor Larnach, the DH, but not because of Trevor Larnach, because I had no faith in Cody Clemens as the everyday first baseman. And honestly, that's another thing that we should talk about. Cody Clemens has been great for the last few weeks. He had another big game today. He's just one of the better hitters on this Twins lineup so far in May, and I think that's unexpected. I wouldn't expect it to continue, but it's at least notable over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I certainly don't think that Cody Clemens is going to be able to sustain this success, but I don't disagree with the idea of bumping Josh Bell's playing time down at this point because he's a veteran on a 1 year deal. He was brought in to perform well in the first half of this season and probably get traded at the deadline. So if he's just not playing well, there's no point in playing him at all. And at the very least, this is really convenient timing because we hopefully don't need to wait long for Emmanuel Rodriguez to be healthy. And if he's healthy and we bring him up and we do push Larnick to more of a DH role, that gives us more flexibility with what we want to do at first base. So for the time being, it's great to see out of Cody Clemens.
Yeah, I will say, even if Josh Bell is struggling now, I definitely think he'll continue to get some playing time. I just think it would come more so at first base than DH. We just talked about how Cody Clemens is playing well right now, but before this recent hot streak, he was just as much a flailing hitter as Josh Bell, and Josh Bell has a much larger career track record. So I definitely don't think the Twins will give up on him. I think it would just more so be they prioritize playing Bell over Clemens at first. But I mean, regardless, I think that neither of those two are going to stand in the way of Austin Martin or Trevor Larnach getting playing time if they continue to play the way that they have.
That is, I think, one thing that the Twins do really benefit from right here that we've talked about a little bit, but I don't think we've really emphasized how I think their positional flexibility around the diamond is really good. I would say it's probably in the better half of the league for sure, just in terms of how interchangeable a lot of these pieces become. Where if you do want to bring up Emmanuel Rodriguez and then you push Larnick to first, or not first, to DH, you still have room then to decide, okay, do we just want to send Cody Clemens down or maybe we want to send Royce Lewis down because he's struggling and we think he needs the Matt Wallner treatment? Well, we're still able to get there by pushing Brooks Lee to third base where he's more than capable, and then either letting Ryan Kreidler play more of an everyday shortstop role since they already clearly seem okay with him as an everyday center field role. Granted, that won't last once Buxton gets healthy, but you could also just call up Kalen Culpepper at that point. You have a lot of ways to push Brooksley out of short, which could push him to third base. And then that would be able to help you send down Royce Lewis. You could also either kick Keishel out to the outfield more and kind of have him be your pseudo fifth outfielder, or you could have him also focus more on DHing with Trevor Larnick and kick Cody Clemens out to second base. I think because we were talking about this a bit yesterday, how it would be really fun for a little while to be Derek Shelton this year with how fluid this entire roster is. Obviously, as you pointed out, doing this for 162 games probably gets more frustrating than it is fun. But at the very least, it's cool to see how the Twins have kind of such a fluid roster going on right now.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, like, you'd prefer to just have good players that we know that roll and they're productive every day. And I think part of the reason there's so much, you know, fluidity and flexibility in this roster is that we have so few established good players. And it just leads to guys moving around. I'll also say a lot of our better players have not a whole lot of versatility. Like, Trevor Larnick's been one of our best players. He's pretty much, a corner outfield only guy. Buxton could absolutely play a corner, but he's going to play every day in center. Austin Martin can moonlight in the infield, but he's a corner guy. Ryan Jeffers can only catch. He doesn't even have, first base as an option. He's pretty much just a catcher. And so those are our best hitters. And it seems like it's a lot of the ancillary guys who have the ability to move around. And so, yes, it does help. When we have prospects come up, we can accommodate them, we can get them playing time. But it's also just because, we have a lot of not so great big leaguers. Brooks Lee hasn't been super productive. He's had a better year, but he's not an established guy. He can move around. Ryan Kreidler can move around. We have some of these guys who are only in the big leagues because they're decent defenders with versatility. And the goal long term would be we don't necessarily need those types of guys. We can just have good productive players at every position, and those guys are maybe a true backup.
Yeah, this whole infield talk as we're looking to hopefully finally get some of our prospects promoted on the hitting side is starting to feel very scarily similar to what we are running into on the pitching side. I feel like we talk about this every week, but we are another week into the season, and if anything, our entire pitching staff is only less clear than it was last week. And a lot of it this time is good complication, certainly better than what we were talking about last week. Obviously, as we mentioned, Zebby Matthews got called up when Taj Bradley went on the L, right?
Now he got called up when Travis Adams got sent down, but it's essentially the Taj IL
Yep.
swap.
So Zebby Matthews threw a great game on Thursday to help us take the series against the Marlins. You presume that he's going to be in the rotation to stay now until he has a poor game. That could change, but I think he's already done enough to show that he belongs on the major league roster over Simeon Woods Richardson. Clearly, the Twins agree because Simeon is supposed to pitch tomorrow on Monday in the finale against the Brewers, and instead, the Twins simply said that they would reveal their pitching plans moving forward after the game today on Sunday. We still do not have word of that, but if
We
it's
we do
not
have word
going to
of
be,
that.
we do have word of
Dan
that.
Hayes, yeah, Dan Hayes about 5 minutes ago said that Kendry Rojas is starting tomorrow. But it sounds like it's going to be more of a bullpen game. So definitely don't expect Kendry to be in a full starter's workload. He also noted that Sim could still pitch tomorrow, but nothing is certain.
So to me, what that sounds like, besides the whole Kendry Rojas start thing, because I am really confused about what the Twins are doing with him, is that they functionally have found a way to bump Zebby into Taj Bradley's spot in the rotation. Taj Bradley, conveniently enough, is scheduled to start. I don't know if it's tomorrow, but early this
He
week
he started
at.
today in
Oh, he
AAA.
started today. All right. So he just had a rehab start at AAA, which means he is already back or close to being back. Hopefully, that means he's missing close to his minimum 15 days. And in an ideal world, I would imagine that we just roll over this rotation and then the next time this spot comes around, we just stick Taj Bradley right back in.
Yeah, it definitely could be. I think I don't know. I At this point, I feel like the Twins have enough starting pitching, and I'm more so wondering what they do with Sim. Like, I wonder the wording of what Dan Hayes tweeted was saying Sim could pitch tomorrow. Nothing's for certain. I wonder if they're contemplating Sim being off of this roster. I think that would come as a surprise, just because the Twins, and they're not alone in this, don't have a ton of starting pitching depth if a bunch of guys get injured. And Sim, is a controllable starting pitcher who has had success in the big leagues, and those are always valuable players. But I wonder if the Twins are, kind of shopping Sim around, seeing what their options are, because honestly, like he has not looked like one of their 13 best pitchers this year. He doesn't look like a big leaguer, and I wonder if they're preparing for the possibility of rolling with Prelip and or Zebby in the rotation for a lot of the rest of the year, knowing that they have Rojas as an option. Eventually, maybe Festa comes back. Abel and Bradley are going to be back soon. It's starting to feel like maybe Simeon Woods Richardson's on the outside looking in. And I'll also say all of those guys we just mentioned are controlled for many, many years. And so it's not like there's suddenly going to be a massive opening for Sim in the future. Yes, we only have one more year of Joe Ryan after this, but I mean, it just feels like Simeon Woods Richardson has worked his way out of the Twins pitching plans, and it might be time to move on.
Yeah, to me, he is easily at the complete bottom of the pecking order of guys we were reasonably expecting to see at some point this year. He's below Prelip to me. He's below Zebby Matthews to me. If they even decide to bring David Festa back as a starter, I'd rather see him over Simeon Woods Richardson. So at that point, you're not even thinking a year ahead of, hey, what are we going to do to fill our starting pitching depth after Joe Ryan is gone? Even if that happens at the deadline, I don't think that Sim is a part of that equation because if he's fallen that far from grace off the Twins' radar. I just don't see I don't see pitching depth being a good enough reason to keep a guy like Simeon Woods Richardson around anymore. I think that quite honestly, you would go and pick up guys off the scrap heap, especially after the trade deadline, guys that get waived and immediately cut or guys you can pick up for cheap. I just think that he's kind of pitched himself into being completely not completely invaluable to the Twins, but he's in a spot where the roles that he could or maybe would fill and do admirably well for the Twins are spots you would rather be giving to our younger guys coming up, anyways.
Yeah, and I'll also say, like, even when he's been successful in the past, I think we've both had our doubts about Sim, and not only him reaching that next level and being a mid rotation starter, but even staying as a back end starter, being a reliable fourth or fifth guy. You know, in 2024 is when he kind of took his first big step forward and became a reliable, piece of this Twins rotation. And that season, he had a below average 20.6% strikeout rate, an average ish, maybe a smidge above 8.4% walk rate. Both the strikeouts and the walks went up last year, and so did his FIP. His FIP came in at 4.52. Strikeouts are around league average, 22.7, a well above average, or well, below average walk rate of 9.8%. And this year, the strikeouts have completely fallen off. The walk rate hasn't gotten any better. He has matching 10.1% strikeout and walk rates. That is truly atrocious, especially, the strikeout rate. And, it's reflected in all of his projections rest of season. We've talked about this a couple of times, but even now on Fangraphs, Zips has the most favorable projection for Sim, and it's at a 4.58 FIP. And it goes all the way up to the bat having him at 5.26. And so, really, any of those numbers are probably not good enough to hold down a fifth starter spot. We've also seen Sim not be able to work deep into games throughout the entirety of his career. It's continuing this year, averaging less than 5 innings per start. I mean, there's just not a ton to like here. I get wanting to keep him around, just because he's been productive in the past. It's so hard to find starting pitching. But him being out of options, I think, really limits what the Twins can do with Sim. And I would not be surprised to see them trading him to a non-contending team in the next few days and, trying to clear out that roster spot and get at least something back.
Yeah, he certainly would be able to fill in the back end of at least some rotation still in the MLB, which is, I think, kind of ironic to talk about considering the Minnesota Twins are widely regarded as one of the worst teams in the league still right now. Whether or not they'll actually end up finishing there is a different story, but I do think that he's not completely valueless. The reason I say he's more valueless for the Twins is, as I kind of alluded to, he, at the very minimum, I think could still fill a long relief role and fill that pretty well, probably above average compared to your normal mop-up guy out of a bullpen. But the Twins, who do very much have a need and an opening for a long-term bullpen guy with how shaky their rotation has been, how shaky their bullpen has been, and how often they need to eat a good amount of innings, seem pretty content to fill that with Kendry Rojas in some manner or another. I'm honestly a little perplexed that he is getting the start again tomorrow on what will be his fourth day since his last outing, which, as Matt mentioned, was only about 40 pitches, but they seem to not even be entirely sure what they want to do with Kendry Rojas in terms of keeping him stretched out as a starter or converting him along with Andrew Morris into our bullpen entirely.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird. They're kind of doing the every 4-day thing with Kendry Rojas that we've seen a lot of starters do in the minors for the Twins. They're trying to do it with Rojas in the big leagues. It's a very strange role, and it's kind of like if you took a long reliever in a bullpen, but then also said, this guy's one of our best relievers. We want to make sure he's throwing as every 4th day, wherever he's available. And so it's obviously not the same tier of pitcher, but it's kind of like early in his career, John Duran, when he was still kind of stretched out, the Twins would throw him for 2 innings, 2 1/3 in high leverage spots, but they would, use him for multiple innings, have him be down for a couple days, come back, throw a couple more innings. And I think that's a role that we could see Kendry Rojas fill, at least for this year, as he's, getting healthy again, building back up his arm. And maybe long term, he turns back into a starter where you could see him throw a traditional 5 or 6 innings. But it's just very funky to see. And I think it's hard for us to get a grasp of what that use looks like. And it'll be really interesting to see how it plays out over a longer season.
Yeah, I think the fascinating part there that makes it unique compared to a lot of your other long relief situations is, as you mentioned, it's high leverage outings that he's still getting put into. I think a lot of times when you look at the mop up guy in the bullpen, it's a guy that you bring out when either you're blowing a team out or you're getting blown out. And normally it's you getting blown out. Your starter didn't last long, and you need somebody to just go in there and fill innings. The game's already out of reach, so it doesn't really matter how they do. But they are giving Rojas, and to a lesser extent, mainly because they've shortened up his stints already, but Andrew Morris, not just longer outings than your traditional bullpen guys, but yes, also higher leverage situations, which is fair and makes sense because, as you mentioned before we started recording today, I think we're approaching a world where Andrew Morris is already our highest leverage reliever. And so if he's more than healthy and capable enough to go out there and give you two and a thirds innings, we've seen the Twins be willing to push him to do that. And it's a unique way to get around filling high leverage innings with a very non high leverage bullpen. So I'm a fan of it.
Yeah, I'll also say if you're worried about length in the bullpen, there is an argument to be made that Sim should just be demoted to the long relief role. We've talked about that before. In those situations where you're up by a bunch or down by a bunch, you just need to throw a guy out there to, throw strikes, get outs. If he gives up a few runs, it doesn't really matter. Sim's definitely capable of doing that. Keeps him in the org if they, end up having a need in the rotation, or if Woods Richardson, finds his groove again. I think that's probably the most likely scenario, is that they're going to move Sim to the bullpen. He's going to be their mop up long man. The start tomorrow, they're going to patch it together with Rojas and crew. And then, the idea is in a week or 2 weeks, whenever that next turn through the rotation is, they probably go back to Taj in that role. And then, they figure it out when Mick Abel comes back. Maybe when Abel's healthy, they send Prelip down for a little while to conserve his innings. Maybe they, have Prelip throw an outing or two out of the bullpen. There's a lot of options all of a sudden, especially once they get healthy. And it'll be interesting to see how tomorrow goes and what the plan is for Sim in the next few weeks.
Yeah, I just kind of question the ability to carry that many long inning relievers that can't really be used as a starter because if you're already dedicating Kendry Rojas largely to that role, Andrew Morris, who is at this point firmly just a reliever, is still filling a lot, I would say, longer stints and lesser appearances.
I mean,
And I
Andrew Morris has not worked more than an inning in like his last 3 or 4 outings.
And I think some of that has been more situational. I know today he threw an inning, which ended up being over 2 innings because they brought him in to get Bonda out of his jam and then gave him the first 2 outs of the next inning before they ran into a little bump of lefties in the lineup and they threw Taylor Rogers in to clean it up. And to me, that doesn't really scream that, oh, hey, we want to only limit him to 1 inning now due to effectiveness or any of that. It's really just a situational thing where I think in an ideal world, you still see Andrew Morris coming in a clean inning, and provided he gets through that first clean inning, you give him a second one. And if he gets through that second clean inning, he maybe even gets a third. But there's only so many spots on a pitching staff for that if we're already dedicating 4 spots still to Joe Ryan and Bailey Ober and God, there's really no other healthy starting pitchers right now. Really, it would just be Zebby Matthews and eventually Taj Bradley and McAble. But I think the Twins can maybe delay the inevitable a little bit. But to me, there's not much difference in getting Sim off your roster either via DFA or a trade now versus in a month.
A couple of counterpoints to that. A, the Twins can fit whoever they want on their pitching staff because they have 6 terrible relievers that you can cut with no regard for their future outcomes. Like if they cut Luis Garcia or Justin Topa or Taylor Rogers or Anthony Bonda or literally anyone that pitched today, Yoendrys Gomez, like it doesn't matter. You could cut any of those guys to clear a spot for someone that you think has a chance to be, at least a solid arm. I'll also say, looking back at Andrew Morris's game logs, he hasn't thrown more than an inning in an outing since May 3rd. So it's been 2 full weeks since he's thrown more than an inning. And even before that, April 30th, he threw an inning and a third. It looked like the Twins were starting to shorten him down. May 3rd, the outing when he threw 3 2/3 innings, was just because Joe Ryan left after facing 2 batters. And so they just had a kind of, oh crap moment. We needed to get a guy in there. And so I think that's why Morris stayed stretched out for that outing. But he's looked like a traditional 1 inning reliever since then. And I think that makes sense for the Twins. They need to have someone available to throw in a leverage spot in the late innings. And Morris is pretty well equipped for that. And so I think Morris is no longer a multi-inning guy. I think he's a true 1 inning reliever. Maybe you throw him back out there for an inning and a third, inning and 2/3. But I think the days of seeing him go 2, 3, 4 innings are probably over. Yeah, I'll also say the starting rotation has been very good, and they've generally worked longer into outings. That's also going to be supplemented by the time you get, guys like Mick Abel and Taj Bradley back. You'd expect more long starts. And so you can carry a guy like Kendry Rojas, now in a shorter starts, long relief outings type of role. Maybe he eventually transitions to being more of a 1 inning guy like Andrew Morris. You can still have Sim there for mop up, pitching long relief. If you have, Prelip shifted to the bullpen, he can throw shorter outings. They have a lot of options, and I think they have that ability to get creative because the existing options are so bad that even Rojas or Prelip throwing a 4th inning out of the bullpen and then being spent for a couple days is preferable to being like, all right, we're going to throw Yoendrys Gomez for 2/3 of an inning and then Bonda for 2/3, and then we'll try to get an inning out of Luis Garcia. Like that's just not going to be effective, So like you might as well give a shot to these guys.
I do want to stick up for just 1 second for Luis Garcia, not because I think he's good or because he has been good. I just specifically want to mention because this was like an eye-opening event for the Minnesota Twins, how he pitched himself into a jam early in the 9th inning, giving a 2-run lead to go out there and save. But after pitching himself into a jam, giving up a run, and putting himself in a point where he largely needed to get the outs or we were going to blow another lead, I watched Luis Garcia step up onto the mound, fall behind Christian Yelich 0-2 or 2-0, and then proceed to come back and strike him out on a 97-mile-an-hour sinker that he just put right by Christian Yelich. It was weirdly dominant from a guy that I know is not dominant and will not continue to be dominant, but it was at least fun to be able to see him step up in a high leverage situation and not even get the job done, but at least get the save. That being said, I do agree. Ultimately, I think there are currently three relievers in the bullpen that I think have to stay up and will stay on the roster the entire year. That is Andrew Morris, Justin Topa, and Taylor Rogers. Outside of that, I think anybody in that bullpen can be considered fair game to go up, to go down, to get traded, to get DFA'd. I don't think anybody's immune to another bad month from being off this team.
I mean, Topa and Rogers can go too. Topa's been their worst reliever. He's not getting strikeouts. He's giving up home runs. He's walking guys. And Rogers, his strikeout rate's way down from peak. He's gotten really lucky. I don't think he's allowed a home run yet this year. And that's driving a decent ERA, even though the underlying numbers are pretty bad. I'll also say for Luis Garcia, he came into today's outing with the Twins. So not counting today's because the stats haven't refreshed, but he had 7 2/3 innings for the Twins over 8 appearances. He had recorded 1 strikeout, so he got strikeout number 2 today. And he has a sub 3% strikeout rate for the Twins. For context, league average is like 22%. For a reliever, it's like 23.5. He is at a tenth of league average for strikeout rate. Like, there's no world where you can be productive as a reliever like that. And so, I mean, not to say that you're like advocating for Luis Garcia, sudden high leverage reliever, but like Luis Garcia is like not a big league reliever.
No, I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm gonna yank the chain a little bit towards a question that I have just come up with because I was scrolling through our stats page. First of all, I was kind of advocating for Justin Topa just because he's already at 2 saves, which puts him on my watch list for 5 pitchers to get to 5 saves this season. But that brought me to another guy who is on the board with 1 save and has by all means been pitching better than 90% of the bullpen arms we've seen out there. Why has Eric Orzi only had 1 outing in the last like week and a half? We saw him pitching pretty regularly. Even through the front end of May, he pitched on the 1st and then the 3rd, the 5th, the 8th, and the 9th, and has been more productive than most Twins members. He has more strikeouts and walks, which is something that we should be celebrating in the Twins bullpen. And
What a
then
low
since
bar.
a low bar that he still only barely clears, by the way, with 17 punchouts to 12 walks. That's far below. I think he's sitting at like a 7 something strikeouts per nine. So that's still not even a great rate. But at least it's progress for this Twins bullpen. But since May 9th, he has 1 outing. It was yesterday against Milwaukee where he threw 2 innings, gave up 2 hits, 1 walk, struck out 1, did not give up a run. So I guess we did see him just yesterday, but he's largely been absent from this bullpen, and I can't really figure out why.
Well, he's been ridden hard and put away wet. I mean, he has thrown frequently and also has thrown multiple innings most often. So April 29th, 28 pitches. And then, what, 2 or 3 days later, 33 pitches on the first. And then on 1 day's rest, 24 pitches. And then he had a day off and then 16 pitches. And then, yeah, he got into more of a normal rate where he, got a couple days off, 16 pitches, and then threw 15 the next day. And then, a long layoff until his last outing. But I think probably the reason we saw him go, you know, a week between appearances is just because he had thrown a lot of innings and a lot of pitches over the first, 6 weeks of the season. And the Twins probably wanted to give him a break. I'll also say in that week, the Twins had a lot of long outings from starting pitchers, including a Bailey Ober complete game. So there's probably less opportunities for Orzi to come in. But yeah, I mean, also it says something that we're advocating for more Eric Orzi appearances when Eric Orzi is like maybe an effective middle reliever. Right now, he has an 18.5% strikeout rate, which is not great. He has a 13% walk rate, which is bad. And he has only a 38% ground ball rate. So he's giving up a lot of fly balls. He's not getting many strikeouts. He's letting a lot of guys on base with the free pass. And he's gotten pretty lucky so far to have a 3.86 ERA because his expected FIP, when you factor in home run regression, is a 4.93. And so I don't know. I mean, he has been our most effective reliever so far this year, but he's still not that good, especially when you're asking him to throw multiple innings and throw, most days. It's hard to see his arm holding up.
Yeah, I mean, we've clearly been seeing the Twins working away from him because of how much he's been throwing, but he still, to me, just adds to the list of guys in the bullpen that can throw multiple innings that I'd rather see be there over Simeon Woods Richardson. I get the difference is that you can pretty comfortably throw Sim 3 to 4 innings and not see his effectiveness fall off. The issue is that I don't know that he's effective enough at the front end for that to even matter because I would still rather see 2 innings of Eric Orzi followed by another 2 innings of Andrew Morris, and I would see 4 innings of Simeon Woods Richardson, which I think the Twins would definitely agree with.
Yeah, but the use case is different, right? Because you're only throwing Sim in blowouts, but Sim being able to eat multiple innings in a blowout, like if Bailey Ober gives up 8 runs in 4 innings, they can just say, all right, today's the Sim game. And he throws the last 5. You don't have to throw anyone else. The bullpen's then fresh the next day. Versus if you have all these guys who can throw, 2 innings, and they're probably more effective in those 2 innings than Simeon Woods Richardson. Well, if Orsi throws 2 innings, and then you have, Taylor Rogers throw an inning and 2/3, and then you have Morris throw 2 innings, you're eating like the same amount of the game. Like you're eating 5 or 6 innings, but now those 3 guys are down the next day. And so by having Sim pitch large chunks, this game got away from us. We don't care the results. Sim's just going to eat it. Now, not only are you making, guys like Orsi and Rogers available and fresh for future games, but you also know that we don't necessarily have to stretch this guy for a second inning. We can tell Eric Orsi he's got the 8th and to just let it ride out there. And so you end up using these guys multiple innings less, and they're fresher and not being used in games that don't matter.
Okay, but for a team who, when fully healthy, has a clear strength in the starting rotation and a clear weakness in the bullpen, I don't think that it is worth giving or not giving up, but dedicating a permanent bullpen spot to Simeon Woods Richardson, who we only want to bring in mop up situations. When granted, a blowout, a bad start can happen to any starting pitcher, but when we're healthy, we have Joe Ryan and Taj Bradley, who both looked at least all-star caliber pitchers this year. We have Bailey Ober, who, again, question all you want how it's going to sustain, because I certainly am, but once again continues to look like a stellar third option in a rotation, a guy who certainly you aren't super worried about blowing out. I mean, for goodness sakes, he just threw a Maddox last week. He threw a complete game shutout, his first shutout in his career, under 90 pitches, making him, fun trivia fact for you here, Matt, the first Twin to throw a shutout since July of 2023. Who threw that shutout?
July of 20. Sonny Gray? Joe
Not
Ryan?
Sonny Gray. Not Joe Ryan.
Pablo?
Which,
Yeah.
that one, not super hard trivia, makes sense. It's more the fact that it's been 3 years since we've seen a Twin throw a complete game shutout. So to me, I would rather just hold on to Travis Adams and continue to bounce him between AAA and the major leagues and have him on the roster ready to go in a blowout situation when you need him, because you can at least send him back down to the minors and fill him in with a different reliever once you inevitably have to waste him for a few days on a blowout situation. Whereas with Sim, if you bring him in to throw 4 innings in a blowout situation, he's still going to be out for the next 3 to 4 days at a minimum, but you can't send him down. You have to burn that bullpen spot for half a week on a guy that you didn't really want pitching anyways.
Okay. But also, I think you're discounting the uptick in effectiveness for guys who know that they're only going to have to throw 1 inning. They don't have to stay stretched out for 2 or 3 innings at a time. Like if you tell Travis Adams, you're throwing the 6th inning and you're only throwing 1 inning, let it buck. You'll probably have better stuff in that inning versus if you say, well, we might have you throw the 7th depending on, what the score is. And like also your next outing could be 2 or 3 innings. We don't really know. It's just different, and it makes me believe that guys can be more effective in shorter stints, and you have the ability to do that by saying at any given point, Simeon can just eat a game. We give everyone a rest versus having to string 3 or 4 of these guys together to patch it together to make it to the next day and then have a shorthanded bullpen. And I'll also say, like, yes, they can have guys like Travis Adams or John Klein come up and like maybe pitch an inning or two, but like be there in case there's a blowout and then they have to throw 3 and then they get option and then you bring up the next guy. Like that's possible. That's a use case. But now you're dedicating not only one guy in the big leagues, but probably 1 or 2 more guys in AAA to be stretched out for 2 or 3 innings so that at any given point, if there's a blowout on the major league team, we can, do a line change, bring a new guy in case there's another blowout, or to be maybe a middle reliever for a game. If you just have Sim and that's his role is to eat bad games, now you don't need Travis Adams stretched out for 2 or 3 innings. You don't need John Klein stretched out for 2 or 3 innings. Those guys can become 1 inning relievers. Their stuff ticks up. They might actually be effective relievers. and now they can just come up and be a normal reliever in the bullpen. You don't need to have 4 guys who can throw 2 innings. You can just have 4 guys. You can have 3 guys that throw 1 inning and 1 sim.
I guess I just don't see the need for Travis Adams or John Klein as one inning relievers. I'd rather see us bring Festa back and put him into the bullpen as a
Yeah,
one inning
if
reliever when
Festo
he's
is healthy, he'd be in the bullpen. But also, John Klein as a 1 inning reliever is probably better than 3% strikeout rate Luis Garcia. Like, there's a need for in the bullpen for sure.
I guess I'm maybe just gonna disagree with that. It's not that I think that 3% strikeout rate Luis Garcia is any good, but I think that we just have so many options. Cody Lawson is going to be back at some point. Cole Sands is going to be back at some point. Obviously, this entire math is different right now with so many guys hurt. Sim is probably still holding on to a rotation spot in some manner until we at least get Taj Bradley back. But that being said, I just don't really see the need or value for Travis Adams or John Klein in a one inning role. So at that point, if they're not filling the one inning role, they may as well be your bulk relievers to eat bad games like Sim would be doing. And I'm sorry, I really don't care about the strain that might be putting on the AAA roster because they are also going to need a guy who can fill the same situation, and therefore they're going to already have multiple guys on the roster to cycle up and down in the manner that I would be describing. But also, it's the AAA rotation. You can
Oh,
either
I
a just
Yeah, I mean, I don't care about the AAA side. I'm just saying that you're hurting developmentally for the big league team. These guys by throwing multiple innings in AAA when it's like they would only be effective as a 1 inning reliever in the big leagues. They don't have the stuff to be a multi inning guy in the big leagues. Like they have a million dudes that can eat innings down there. Like that's not my
yeah.
concern.
I don't disagree. I guess my point just becomes then that I really don't think that Sim is effective at all, even in a mop up role. So in that case, I would rather give the roster spot to a guy who's going to be similarly ineffective, but in a more movable contract up and down to the minor leagues at least.
That's fair, but like even if you're doing that, that's still a roster spot that you're eating. And like you said, the rotation we expect to be strong, so we don't expect that many blowouts. And if it means, you know, Sim being a twin or not a twin, using him as the long reliever, keeping open the possibility that he could still be an effective major league pitcher that we've seen before. Like, I feel like the upgrade to having a Travis Adams or a John Klein in a relief role, and then you can option them, and then maybe you get some additional roster flexibility that maybe you have a little bit more coverage if you have 2 blowouts in a row. I think that matters a lot less with a strong rotation, and you'd prioritize keeping Sim in the org. And also now these guys can throw 1 inning and maybe they can be a middle reliever. And even if they're a true talent 4.5 ERA guy in a 1 inning stint for Travis Adams, John Klein, that's not a good reliever. That's a below league average reliever. It's better than almost the entire Twins bullpen. I mean, Luis Garcia, we're talking about here as like, oh, he's the guy that would go, he's, like I said, 3% strikeout rate for the Twins. Atrocious. And so it's easy to point to him and be like, well, he's obviously the odd duck out. He got a save today, and it's his second save with the Twins, and he has 2 holds. He's one of their higher leverage guys. Like he's not even the bottom of the totem pole, and he's truly not a big league reliever. And so just having not a good reliever, but just someone who's around league average, that's like Eric Orsi. Like if we could turn John Klein and Travis Adams into Eric Orsi clones, that makes our bullpen a lot better, and that's enabled by converting them to a 1 inning role and having Sim be the long man.
I think the one thing we haven't discussed here at all that I'm curious for your thoughts on, because I don't so much follow the, movement, spin rate, all like usage rates of a lot of these guys. We haven't talked about the idea of Sim getting moved to the bullpen, but him becoming just a 1 or 2 inning guy. Is he a guy that you could buy into at all, maybe even more than Travis Adams and John Klein, as a guy whose stuff could tick up to make him a serviceable league average reliever if we convert him to a pure 1 1 1/3 inning type of role?
I mean, like, not really. Just because Sim never had great velocity. He talked about one of the key tweaks he made going into 2024 was trying to get back to being athletic on the mound He lowered his arm slot. He tried to let his fastball play up a little bit more. And we saw a 2 mile per hour bump in his velo. He's averaged around 93 for the last 3 years. But it really feels like for Sim, that's already getting as much out of him as possible. And he's still not missing bats. He's never missed bats in the big leagues. And so even if you project he gets back to his baseline level as a big league starting pitcher. He takes a massive jump back and is that level of pitcher. You would still then need a jump above that for him to have average stuff as a reliever. So it would take, quite an improvement for Sim to be even an average middle reliever. And I just don't think he has that kind of stuff in his arm, even working in shorter stints.
I had to really hold it in to not interrupt you there. I was looking at some of the baseball savant pages specifically because I've been kind of thinking to myself, well, okay, what is it about Bailey Ober that's made him effective this year with noticeably diminished stuff that a guy like Simeon Woods Richardson cannot replicate? I haven't looked at Sim's baseball savant page all year. This is my first time looking at it. I almost choked on my own spit when I opened his page to see him in the very first percentile in pitching run value, breaking run value, and off speed run value. That means that he is the absolute worst pitcher in the MLB at doing anything other than throwing a fastball. And even that is only in the 46th percentile for run value. So I think what I'm gathering here, looking at Sims Page versus Bailey Ober's, is that Ober has redefined himself and committed to being the crafty lefty as a right-hander, where his walk rate is significantly down this year compared to past years. He is just locating better. He's inducing weaker contact. Whereas Sim, I think his big issue is he just cannot keep the ball in the zone. And because he cannot keep the ball in the zone, hitters know that they can just wait for something in the zone that they can absolutely smack. But I'm curious, I guess, what your take would be there between a guy like Bailey Ober who has figured it out and a guy like Sim who has not.
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Like, Sim doesn't have good off speed pitches. And honestly, his fastball at various points of his career has been a liability. And even now is only about league average. He's had a below average walk rate. Like, he's walked more guys than we would expect. He also doesn't get ground balls. He's a true fly ball pitcher, which is a problem for a guy who doesn't miss bats. And yeah, I mean, overall, I have very little faith in Sim bouncing back and being even a usable fifth starter. I think at this point, I have very little hope in Sim, and I would not doubt the Twins if they, decide to move on and DFA SWR and see what they can get from him. But yeah, I mean, he's probably not going to be a good player regardless of where we put him. And so it probably doesn't matter. But if they do choose to hold on to him, I think having him just be a mop up guy in the bullpen makes sense.
I guess I can agree only because I just would hate to see him in any other sort of role for the Twins. I'm honestly team DFA him at this point. I think that a lot of these hypotheticals we're running through right now where it's like, oh, but if we keep Sim in the bullpen, then we can have Travis Adams and John Klein as one inning guys to get Luis Garcia out of the bullpen. Like, yes, this matters, but this is such a moment in time for the Twins where I think this I'm not going to say that I think this won't be an issue after this season because you just never know how far the Pohlads are really going to drag down this budget. But I think that even if we had approached this offseason with Jeremy Zoll as the GM full time and Tom Pohlad as the controlling owner full time, I think Jeremy Zoll has very much mentioned that he would have put more of an emphasis on building up this bullpen. I think Tom Pohlad has made comments about how he was never going to expand and blow up the budget, but he certainly seems like he could have been more amenable to spending maybe another $10 million to get Luis Garcia out of this bullpen. Like I said, maybe this is all just lip service and they're going to slap us in the face again next offseason. But I truly believe that by this offseason, none of the guys that we're debating about right now will be on our radar at all to make the Twins 24 man next year.
I bet though, if we had been recording this podcast in August and September last year, we'd be saying the same things we're saying about Luis Garcia right now about Genesis Cabrera or Thomas Hatch, like guys who are like, this guy sucks. Why is he in our bullpen? Oh, well, it's not going to matter after the offseason. Then we had an offseason where they did very little to address the bullpen. And now we're sitting here in May saying, why are these guys in the bullpen? This guy's not even a big league reliever. And I'm just worried that, next offseason, we're going to be hopeful again. We're going to say, surely they're not going to, slap a bunch of AAA relievers out there and call it good. But that's what they did this year. And until I see something different, I'm not going to trust that they're actually going to make improvements to this roster.
I think that's a very reasonable stance to be taking as a fan as well. The other reason that I would pray we don't end up here again is, even though we were billed as having great pitching depth, we have certainly been tested on that this year already. I mean, how much different does this bullpen look if you don't lose Pablo Lopez to season-ending injury on the very first day of camp? If David Festa doesn't have 1,000,001 setbacks on his road to recovery, I mean, right now we're without Cole Sands, we're without Cody Lawyerson, we're without Garrett Acton, McAble. Like, there's so many arms that are hurt right now that should have prevented Luis Garcia from being on this roster. And it's criminal that we still allowed ourselves to get to this point as a professional major league organization. But even though it did happen, you still kind of have to look it in the face, I think, and say there's no way it happens again, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's up to you and how much faith you want to put in this front office and the poll ads. I think the front office generally does a pretty good job. I am very much on Derek Falvey's side. I think they've just been working with some really tough constraints. And also, even within those constraints, they haven't been super proactive about addressing the bullpen. And so I just think it's low on their list of priorities. It's something that they think will just solve itself. And we've yet to see much proof of that actually happening. I will say the Twins bullpen was a concern going back, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 years ago, to the point where we probably were having similar conversations about, like, can this team contend with the bullpen they have in place? And what turned it around was converting a starting pitching prospect in John Duran to the bullpen, converting another starting pitching prospect in Griffin Jacks to the bullpen, finding a random waiver wire guy in Brock Stewart and turning him into an effective reliever, signing Caleb Thielbar to a minor league deal, turning him into an effective reliever, and then, oh, by the way, turning another starting pitcher and Louis Varland into a reliever. And so it's entirely possible that guys like Morris and Rojas and, maybe Prelip, maybe even like Culpepper down in AAA, there's a bunch of guys that we could see turn into relievers that would be, a big boon to this team. But it's hard to say just because it happened 4 or 5 years ago, we can expect it to happen again.
No, but I honestly think that is the correct developmental way to build a bullpen. It's similar to how I think anybody who's ever played the infield in high school or college comes out to the draft as a shortstop. I think that you never really draft a relief pitcher. There's some notable exceptions, like obviously Ben Joyce was just always going to be reliever in the majors. He was always going to move fast through the minor leagues because of that. But generally, I think that you do build a bullpen by converting your starters that have injury concerns, starters that have fringe stuff, starters that, for whatever reason, don't hack it in the rotation into the bullpen. And that's where, again, we've really just been crushed by a lot of these injuries, because I think you could believe that at this point in the season, the Twins would have expected to already have Andrew Morris in the bullpen, which they do, but also have Kendry Rojas and Connor Prelip in the bullpen, which they probably both would be if we hadn't had so many starting pitcher injuries. Marco Raya is another guy who just got moved to the bullpen that he just hasn't been good enough, hasn't been able to rein in the control. But you've got Marco Raya that could have made the jump. You have I was missing another guy or two.
Marco Raya, by the way, 22 innings pitched in AAA this year. He has a 22% strikeout rate to a 12% walk rate. So that's pretty bad. And overall, that has led to an 8.18 ERA with a 7.89 FIP.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about Sim struggling because he can't stop hitters from having loud contact and hitting balls hard in the zone, but he's at least putting balls in the zone. Throwing a strike is the most basic level of being a pitcher
Uh,
professionally.
I mean, his walk rate's over 10% right now, and I would take a guy who can miss bats but struggles to find the zone over a guy who just has an inability to get swings and misses.
I mean, that is true. If we had to pick one of the two of them to be a one inning reliever in the major leagues right now, I would probably still take Marco Raya as well, but neither of them are cut out to be major league pitchers right now. But I think that the Twins aren't necessarily wrong in the way they've gone about building this bullpen. We talked about how they brought in a lot of veteran competition to push these younger guys for their bullpen roles. Obviously, that older competition was never really that serious, although I am still having second thoughts about whether I'd rather have Andrew Chafin and Liam Hendricks right now or have Kenji Yoendries Gomez or Luis Garcia. But either way, I think the Twins have their next plateau of young pitchers that they're going to convert into relievers. They just kind of need all those guys to get major league ready and get healthy. And I think that we're going to be looking at a very different picture because of that in a year. And I think on top of having more guys who will be bullpen ready next year, there's going to be that second wave of guys we just talked about. Your CJ Culpepper, your Dason Hill. There's a few other guys down in the system who might pan out to be great starters, but more than likely are also ticketed to the bullpen eventually, and they're going to be here before you know it as well.
The thing is, right now, the Twins have one or two effective relievers, and they're both starters. I mean, they're both recently converted starting pitching prospects, and the rest of the bullpen's terrible. And if you go into next year expecting starting pitching prospects or just prospects in general to be the main bulk of your bullpen, it's going to go poorly. Because I would say Andrew Morris has taken to the bullpen really well, so has Kendry Rojas, and they still haven't been, elite relievers. They still have below average strikeout rates. They're not, what we would expect to be a conventional late inning power arm. And, if we are expecting five more guys to come up from the minors next year and be effective relievers. First of all, I don't think we have five guys in the minors who will be effective relievers, at least not in year one. Number two, while we're waiting for those guys, who is filling in for them? I doubt that we roll into next year with 6 or 7 or 8 young, fresh relievers. And if we don't, we need the other guys in that bullpen to be $5 to $10 million relievers, like true, you can count on this guy, setup man caliber relievers, and not just Luis Garcia's and Brooks Kriske and whoever else. Like, we can't have replacement level relievers in that bullpen because it's not going to go well. They really need 2 or 3 stabilizing arms, and then you fill out the back end of the bullpen with the young guys that are trying to prove it in the big leagues.
I don't disagree. I also, and I don't know why I'm being so much of a front office or Polat apologist today. It does kind of feel like they went through the same processes that they have in years past of trying to build Twins bullpens, and it just didn't quite stick this year. On top of having, the constantly up and coming young guy pitcher or starter converted into reliever, pitching out of the pen, they have had their share of just taking swings on older guys and guys that are maybe unproven and turning them into success stories. You talked about Caleb Thielbar as a guy that the Twins did that with. If we go farther back, a guy like Matt Whistler got picked up and was brilliant for the Twins for a few years. You've got guys like Trevor May, Trevin Hildenberger, Brandon Kinsler. You got guys like Sergio Romo. I'm really pushing my Twins bullpen depth knowledge here, but they have largely just gotten by in the past on constantly picking up these guys who are DFA'd, fringe guys, guys who need to change the scenery, guys who you believe are too old to get it done anymore. And maybe this year they just whiffed. Maybe this year they just around the horn unanimously went in on the wrong guys. And I mean, I'm not going to say they were big name additions, but you can't tell me that picking up Cody Lawyerson and Zach Kent and Garrett Acton is all that different from going out and trying to flip Trevor May or Trevor Hildenberger or Matt Whistler into a competent bullpen, which is what we've
Yeah,
been able to do in the past.
the difference here is that all of those guys that you listed off as success stories, them working out was them still being the fourth highest leverage reliever for the Twins. Like it was still, this guy is a pleasant surprise. He's been effective this year, and he throws the sixth or the seventh inning. Versus being like, well, we have nobody, and if this guy works out, he's our closer now. He's throwing the highest leverage spots. Like I think the very back end of the bullpen is just so far beneath what we would expect from a major league team. Like the seventh, eighth, and ninth innings are a complete open slate that you hope like Andrew Morris throws one of those innings and it goes well, and maybe Cole Sands. And outside of that, there's really nothing back there. And so I would agree with you that it's a good strategy to grab a bunch of guys, throw it at the wall, see what sticks. And that guy that sticks can be the sixth inning guy. He can be the fourth or fifth in the pecking order, but it's hard to take the same approach when you don't have the 1, 2, and 3 in that bullpen.
I don't disagree at all. I just wonder if that's something that the Twins even needed to care about this offseason. Even though they said that they were going to be good and therefore they wanted to be competitive and try their hardest, clearly there is an aspect of knowing you're not going to be elite yet, right? So, sure, they could have gone out and gave Sir Anthony Dominguez $10 million to pitch for them instead of the White Sox this year. But is that worth Andrew Morris not getting these early season opportunities on to step into higher leverage roles and show what he could possibly do? I just think that we're putting the cart a little bit ahead of the horse in the sense that I don't care if we have set high leverage options right now. We don't really need them. Would it be nice to have like Lewis Varland still in the bullpen? Yeah. And Brock Stewart, if he'd stayed healthy? Yeah. But I don't think the Twins need to be investing on lockdown high leverage relievers yet, because I would rather see those opportunities go to younger guys who could grow into that one day, so we at least know firmly by the end of this year if they could or could not be that guy.
Okay, but there's room for both. Like Andrew Morris is in the bullpen right now, and so is Garcia and Yoendrys Gomez. And if you had swapped Luis Garcia for a serviceable setup, man, like I'm not saying it has to be a super high end reliever. It can be a 1 inning, $5 to $10 million guy, or 1 year, $5 to $10 million guy who on a good team probably throws the seventh or eighth inning. It's a massive upgrade for the Twins. That's a stabilizing force in the back end of the bullpen, and it doesn't take away opportunities from guys like Morris or Raya or Rojas to come up and try to be an effective big leaguer, because that just means, okay, we don't have to have Yoendrys Gomez in this bullpen. And also, to your point about the Twins kind of knowing ahead of time that they're probably not going to be a contending team, relievers are the most in demand position group in baseball at the deadline. Like you can always trade an effective reliever in July. And so if the Twins had signed 2 or 3 guys to $5 to $10 million deals, and they had, a solid trio of late inning options who could, pitch real innings for a contender, not only are they setting themselves up for, a better 2026, a 2026 where they could actually potentially be successful, but if they're not and the team performs as expected, those guys can then be shipped out for future assets. And by not investing in the bullpen at all, they're not only hurting the team's chances this year, but also eliminating the possibility of, long-term payoff from those guys.
I don't disagree, but I feel like that points more towards the answer being just spending more money in total, which again is what we should be doing, because we could have spent another 20 million on this roster and still comfortably came in well below average in total expenditure, even though we will once again be right around the middle, maybe even slightly on the upper half of market sizes in the MLB this year. But given the money constraints we have, I still don't think it's unfair to look back and say, okay, well, if we had to pick one position where we are going to give it up to a bunch of unknown players and try to aggressively promote our young players and just piece it together, it either was that or first base. Now imagine we had taken the 15 million we spent on Victor Caratini and Josh Bell this year and put that all towards the bullpen. We could have the pieces you want, But now we are locked into Alex Jackson being our backup catcher, and we are locking ourselves into Cody Clemens pretty much being a full time everyday first baseman for the Twins for the entire season. And I'm not saying that that necessarily looks worse than it is now, but that's largely because Josh Bell and Victor Caratini have just been so underwhelming. I can understand why the Twins spent their money the way they did, even if it just very brutally has not worked out so far this year.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely revisionist history to say like they shouldn't have signed Bell and Caratini because at the time, I think both of us were, pretty happy with the value for both of those signings. And it obviously hasn't worked out. I mean, they've been worth a negative one WAR as a pair. It would be, a lot easier to. It's easy to say that that money would be better spent in the bullpen because the bullpen's been so bad, and so have Caratini and Bell. And I agree with you that really the solution was the front office and really ownership not slashing payroll this year even further. They should have spent at least to last year's numbers, maybe even gone back up to where they were in 2023. That would do wonders for this entire roster, but that just wasn't in the cards this year. I will say, they had the ability to go out and trade for relievers. It's not like spending money on relievers is the only way that you can address a bullpen. And in fact, their only bullpen acquisition that's really worked out has been Eric Orsi, and that was in a trade with the Tampa Bay Rays. There's always opportunities to go out and trade for guys like that you feel are undervalued in other organizations. And the Twins just really failed to do that. And they have a very strong farm system, and they have clear areas of surplus, both in the corner outfield, left-handed hitters, some starting pitching prospects you could have maybe dangled in trade. Heck, we're talking about Simeon Woods Richardson as an expendable piece, but if they would have shopped him in the offseason, he was a relatively valuable trade asset, and they could have traded him for bullpen help or help elsewhere or for prospects. And then you feel more comfortable trading other prospects for bullpen. Like there was options. And so I think you can't entirely chalk it up to, well, the front office had no money to work with, and the veterans they signed didn't work out. It's like, well, there were other options. They just chose not to explore them.
I think that to me feels like more of an issue of the Twins just not baking in the potential for things to go wrong and the expected value of a lot of these guys. I think it's again also easy to use revisionist history to say, well, Sim is now a non-asset to this team that should probably be DFA'd, and we could have traded him for something positive at the very least this offseason. But if we look at how we're viewing this team this offseason, it was very flipped, in which we were both kind of pushing for Bailey Ober to get traded because we felt that he was only going to continue to decline in value to the point that he might end up in the role that Sim has been right now. And we we're saying of Sim that, hey, he's never going to be elite, he's never going to be brilliant, but he has been consistently competent his entire career. And that's very valuable to have as an anchor end to the rotation that was going to rely on a lot of unproven and unpitched guys like Taj Bradley, but also like Zebby Matthews and McAble and David Fester and everybody else that hasn't been involved. Where I think the Twins definitely should and could have been more active on the trade market this offseason. I'm not surprised that they took the route they did, even though I objectively think it's wrong.
Okay, well, we've spent enough time on the bullpen. I think the other thing we want to talk about is Royce Lewis. He's continued to look entirely lost at the plate. He is down to a 59 WRC plus on the year, worth negative zero point 0.2 wins above replacement. His strikeout rate is now north of 30% for the season. He struck out 3 more times today before being pinch hit for in the 8th inning. He is hitting 168 going into today, so it's even lower. His total OPS is in the low 500s. I mean, he is a complete non-asset right now for this team. And I think we're not far away from seeing Royce Lewis being optioned to AAA in the same way that Matt Wallner was. And, for me personally, I'm not opposed to that.
I really am stunned that Matt Wallner got the demotion before Royce Lewis because, I mean, not that Matt Wallner has been any good. But if the Twins were willing to make that move, it's a little puzzling how they're not making the same move for Royce Lewis, who has been even worse than Matt Wallner somehow. My assumption, honestly, at this point is that the next position player bump off this roster is probably Royce Lewis, though, over Ryan Kreidler, just because at this point you've got to ask yourself, would you rather have Ryan Kreidler or Royce Lewis playing even pseudo every day? And that answer to me is Ryan Kreidler. I think no matter what the next call up is, if it's Kalen Culpepper, I think it's a very clear cut. You just make him your everyday shortstop, bump Brooks Lee over to third base, call it a day. But even if it is Emmanuel Rodriguez, I think it's easy enough to say that, well, he can play some center field when Buxton is not healthy. And that allows us to make Ryan Kreidler more of our everyday third baseman until we have a better solution there. And honestly, at this point, maybe that just means Ryan Kreidler rides out the season as our everyday third baseman. But I would rather see that than whatever the hell we're seeing out of Royce Lewis.
Yeah, and I don't think that Ryan Kreidler would be like the everyday option, but Kreidler and Tristan Gray platoon, so you always have platoon advantage at third and get some strong defense would be good. We also have Orlando Arcia sitting in AAA. He's having a phenomenal start to the season down there. He's another option. But yeah, I mean, Royce Lewis at this point is entirely unplayable. He's been okay defensively, but he's been such a non-factor at the bat that I mean, it's really hard to justify giving him playing time. And if you're going to have a guy who's a black hole offensively that you have to stash in the eighth or ninth spot in the lineup, you might as well get some really good defensive value from a guy like Tristan Gray or Ryan Kreidler. And also, if that means you get to option Royce Lewis, maybe he figures it out in AAA in a lower pressure environment. That's another bonus. But I mean, he's really just keeping the seat warm for now for a guy like Kalen Culpepper, because I don't think that Royce Lewis is going to turn it around on the fly in the big leagues. I mean, we've seen him fail to adjust for 2.5 years, so there's no reason to suggest it's going to get any better.
Yeah, there's no redeeming quality to Royce Lewis staying up. I'm really at this point only focused on how the Twins maneuver him off the roster. Mainly, do you think we could be seeing Kalen Culpepper soon, or do we really think that we're just waiting for an outfielder to get healthy to bump pins down the lane until we can get Ryan Kreidler back to third base?
Well, I mean, even right now, Kreidler's not playing every day in the outfield. Like he's filled in for Buxton a couple of days, but we expect Buck to probably be back for tomorrow's game. In which point you have Buxton, Larnick, and Martin in the outfield every day. You're then, sometimes going to play James Outman out there. You can also occasionally put Kreidler out there, but I think a Kreidler platoon at third base with Gray is feasible now, even if you're not bringing up, another outfielder. But yeah, I could see Arcia coming up for Lewis. I could see Kalen Culpepper coming up. He's off to a decent start at AAA. It's not the greatest, but he has what is this? A 815 OPS. He's hit 9 home runs. He's stolen 9 bases. He's looked okay defensively. It's definitely more so keeping his head above water in his first taste at the level than it is banging down the door to a major league debut. But I could definitely see him the Twins deeming him ready and calling him up as a corresponding move for Lewis.
It will certainly be interesting to see where we go, not only with Royce Lewis, but with this entire roster. As I said at the start of the episode, we are another week into the season, and with every week into the season, you would ideally like to see your picture getting clearer, your team's direction getting more steady, and the Twins still have not found that groove yet. Unfortunately, I do not think that they're any bit closer to finding that groove, but at the very least, we are about to run into another pretty long stretch of games in our schedule, but also a pretty soft stretch here. We have 3 with Houston, who's been one of the worst teams in the major leagues this year, before getting yet another off day Thursday. Feels like we've been getting a lot of those recently, but then we're diving right in. We get 3 with Boston, who is another team that has been worse than us this year, followed by some White Sox series, the Royals a little bit. So we're going to be busy. We're going to be facing a lot of divisional foes, and that makes this next month really important for the Twins, not only as they're still trying to finalize and find their picture for the year, but also as they're still only 1.5 games out of a wild card spot, and I believe 4.5 out of the division lead. So we will certainly be watching because the Twins so far are still giving us something to watch. If you want more of this content, you can find us on Twitter at the Matt and Eric Talk Twins podcast. We're also both individually active on Twitter, giving you our more day-to-day thoughts as the games are going on. So if you want more, find us there. As for the podcast, as always, you can find us on Spotify, YouTube, Amazon, Apple, however you got here today. You'll keep catching us every week. And until next week, we'll see you later.